Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming out, and big thanks to Friends of Banner Mountain for helping make this happen. A bunch of volunteers showed up and everything got set up in like 15 minutes, and then we all got to hang out and wait for you guys. So that was fun. I'm Chris Friedel. I'm Executive Director of Yuba Watershed Institute, and the purpose of this meeting is to share information about the Little Deer Creek Landscape Resilience Project, which is planned for the Banner Mountain area. And I'm going to be sharing our draft proposed plans for the project. And I emphasize draft because another purpose of this meeting is to solicit feedback from everybody. The plans are in the draft phase, which means they're open to shifting around if any of you guys have really specific feedback that can help us to craft this project. And so I'm going to make a short presentation to give you all good information about the project, and then afterwards we can hang out and be available for questions and also for you guys to submit comments to us. And when I say us, it's me from the YWI, the Yuba Watershed Institute, and then I'm going to introduce some other folks who are helping. Jason Schroeder is with BLM, and he's going to be at one of these tables if anybody has specific questions for BLM. And also we have Kate Gazzo, if you want to stand up. She's from Bear Yuba Land Trust, who is another partner with the YWI, and also Aaron Andrews, who's from Sierra Streams Institute, who is a partner on this project as well. So as you can see, this is a collaboration between a bunch of different agencies and nonprofit organizations, which is a fun part of the project. At each of the tables, there is a map, which I'm going to be showing you during the presentation, but there's also comment cards. For those of you who don't get a chance to talk to one of us face-to-face, but you still have something that you want to say about the project, you can write it on one of the comment cards and put it into one of the white boxes that are on the table. Specific feedback that's really helpful is like, I live on this parcel and I'm aware of this particular issue that needs to be taken care of, or a question like, I don't understand how you're going to access this particular piece of BLM with your equipment because you have to go through private land and I'm the landowner that you need to talk to get the permission for that. That's the sort of thing that's really helpful for us. But anything else that you guys want to say is welcome as well. Okay, so moving on. Okay. So who is the Yuba Watershed Institute? I understand that maybe some of you haven't heard of us. We've actually been around for a long time. The organization was founded in 1990, and it was actually started by a bunch of people, neighbors like you, on the San Juan Ridge that were concerned with how BLM lands were being managed or not in their neighborhood. And the BLM field manager at the time, a guy named Dean Swickert, put it back on the community and said, hey, if you guys are concerned about this, why don't you organize and get together and come up with your plan for what should happen on these BLM parcels. And that was how our organization, the Yuba Watershed Institute, was formed. It was formed to create a management plan for 8 parcels up on the San Juan Ridge that became what's now called the Intimum Forest. The Intimum Forest is a project that we've been working on now for over 30 years. And we've been collaborating with BLM for that long. So we have a long working relationship with BLM, which has been really successful over the years. We had a few cooperative agreements that were signed, legal agreements signed between the two organizations back in the late 90s. And then more recently, last year, we signed a formal memorandum of understanding with BLM. So we have a formal working relationship with BLM right now. And because of the success of that project on the San Juan Ridge, folks in other parts of Nevada County have started to approach us and say, hey, we got BLM land in our neighborhood that needs to be worked on. And so we have 2 other active projects. We have a project in the Round Mountain area, which is over, just on the south rim of the South Yuba River Canyon. It's kind of, between Purdon Road and North Bloomfield Road, kind of right on the top there. That's about a 1,300-acre project that we're planning right now. And then we also have this Little Deer Creek Landscape Resilience Project, which I'm going to talk about. So our mission statement is pretty simple. It's to promote the sustainable use of natural resources and protection of long-term biological diversity in the Yuba River watershed. But we're small. Right now we just have 2 staff, but we did have up to 13 staff this past winter because we had our own fuels crew that was working on the Intimum Forest project. So that was exciting. And then in addition to the landscape resilience projects that we do other community education projects like the fungus foray. We organize that every year. For members, we have a Tree Rings journal that comes out hopefully every year that includes a lot of writings and essays about the Yuba watershed. So these are the projects. It's kind of hard to see, but this is the San Juan Ridge. These are the now 10 parcels of the Intimum Forest. It's about 2,000 acres. Round Mountain is, I guess it's a little less than 1,300 acres, and then Little Deer Creek is down here. Whoops. So this is the map that got sent out with all our promotional materials. The green areas are the areas that we're planning to work. It's kind of hard for you guys to see. We've got these maps on the table so you can get up close and see where the actual streets are. But basically, here's the intersection with Banner Mountain Trail and Gracie Road. And so if you're heading up Gracie from Nevada City, this is Gracie Road right here. Right at that intersection, the BLM starts. And then it's BLM all the way past this little part of Big Blue here. And then you go through another piece of private land before you get up to the top. This is Banner Lava Cap Road. And this little dot right here is the parking lot for the Cascade Canal Access Trail. So all of this is BLM. Right in the middle here that's the Nevada County Sportsmen Club archery range. This is a water treatment plant and water storage reservoir for the city of Nevada City. This is the DS Canal, NID's DS Canal running right through this part of the project here. And then the Cascade Canal Trail, or Cascade Canal runs right here, and the pink lines are the trails. So this is all BLM, and then there's 2 other parcels of BLM that are a little farther afield. This one you can access off of Banning Way or Little Dome Way, and this one, I'm forgetting what the streets are. Looks like Woodwardia Place is the main street that goes past there. So all these areas outlined in red are BLM, but then the project also includes 2 private parcels over here that are outlined in blue. This is Bear Yuba Land Trust's Woodpecker Preserve, and this is a private parcel that has a Bear Yuba Land Trust conservation easement placed on it, but there's currently no public access to this parcel. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how this project came to be. Like I said, the project was proposed to me by community members who were concerned about the fire danger primarily on BLM lands. And so I started to get into the project and realized that there were all these resources at risk in this area. All these recreation trails, the NID canals, the water treatment plant, the archery range, all these community resources that were in danger. So it's actually a very densely utilized set of parcels, and I think it has a very compelling story and need. And I just wanted to say that this project has really come from the community, which is a lot of how our projects start. And folks have also asked, why just these private parcels? Like, why haven't we included other private parcels? At the time, that decision was made specifically because these parcels have conservation easements on them. So that means there's a long-term agreement that those parcels are going to be managed for certain values, certain conservation values. And it also means that if we do a project there, it has a long-term chance of being maintained, and the resources are going to be kept in a certain state for a long time. And the funder that we've been working with so far is the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and they're very concerned about land tenure and kind of long-term access for the projects that they fund. And so we thought it was a good fit to include those parcels. That said, it's always possible to add additional parcels later to other phases, and there are other pots of money that are available for private landowners in the area. And so that's a possibility for future phases of the project. The other thing I wanted to say was we got a planning grant from Sierra Nevada Conservancy that has taken us this far. And the planning grant involved, we worked with Sierra Streams Institute on the planning. There were a bunch of surveys that were done, biological surveys, archaeological surveys, and all that fed into the environmental compliance for the project. On the federal lands, that's NEPA, for those of you guys who are familiar with that. And for the private lands, it's CEQA, which is the state equivalent. And I want to say that the NEPA for this project on the BLM is almost complete. We're just waiting on some consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service to complete that. And what we need for CEQA is done. So we're kind of at the end of our planning phase. The grant is complete, and this is kind of one of the last things we wanted to do, was present this to the public and get feedback. And Sierra Streams Institute was involved in creating a management plan for this project, which fed into a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So what are the goals? I'm just going to run through this real quick. To protect and restore watershed health, increase the water yield, improve forest resilience. So in forest resilience, as you guys probably know, is, there's going to be stressors like bark beetles and wildfire and climate change, rising temperatures, drought, and we want to improve the forest's ability to withstand those stressors without having a major change. And a major change could be like a huge bark beetle outbreak that kills a bunch of trees, or a wildfire that comes through and also, removes a lot of that vegetation, creates a big change. So resilience is the ability of a system to absorb a stressor without having a major change. So that's why we call it landscape resilience. We're trying to create a more resilient landscape that can handle all the changes that are going to happen over the next 100 years. Increasing safety is right up there. We realize that there's a high density of people living in this area, and it's very important that if there were to be a wildfire, that major evacuation route along Gracie Road is safe, and also that we manage the forest in a way so that if there's a wildfire, it has lower fire effects, and doesn't go up into the crown, and hopefully can be fought in a safe way and protect all the homes and the resources in the area. We also want to, of course, reduce that huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions that comes from wildfire, and also increase the forest's capacity to sequester carbon by growing big trees. Right now there's a lot of little trees, and they're all competing for water and other resources. And so if you reduce competition, you can grow some bigger trees and sequester more carbon. At least that's the idea. Protecting drinking water supply is very important. With these City of Nevada City water treatment plant and the NID canals that come through, those are huge infrastructure that we want to protect in the event of a wildfire. And then also we want to protect and preserve the recreation opportunities that are in this area that I mentioned. The Cascade Canal Trail, Yuba Land Trust Preserve, and the Nevada County Sportsmen Club archery range, which is it's known as one of the best ranges in California, if not the entire West. So definitely something worth preserving. We're going to get into this map in a little more detail. The colors are kind of hard to see on here, but this is a map this is the map that's on the tables, and it shows the proposed treatments in each area. I just wanted to point out that what we're proposing to do here is to remove understory fuels, or reduce understory fuels. And when I say understory, I mean small trees and shrubs. We're limited to 10 inches diameter and less with this project, except for we can take out larger trees if they're a hazard, if they're dead and dying, and in danger of falling in someone's property or on a road, a trail, power line, things like that. But we're not talking about doing like a timber harvest or anything like that. There aren't going to be logging trucks or big skid roads and things like that. We're talking about smaller pieces of equipment, small masticators or chippers on tracks, chippers that are towed behind trucks, and I'll get into the details. But basically the treatments we're proposing are, the largest one in green is mastication, which, as you guys probably know, it's a masticating unit on a piece of equipment that comes in and it shreds the vegetation. It leaves the fuels on site, doesn't remove the fuel, but it redistributes it. So it can take ladder fuels, fuels that are going up into the canopy of trees, and it can put them down on the ground and break them up into smaller pieces so that they can more easily decompose. And it can also treat surface fuels. So any of the trees that have died recently, all the limbs and trees that came down in the past few winter storms, masticators can come through and kind of shred that material up and get it smaller and get it to decompose faster. The next color is hand cut and remove. So in some areas that are in orange on the map, we're proposing to come in with hand crews, cut that material and drag it to a road or a place where it can be chipped, or in some cases a place where you drag it to a place where a masticator can run over it a few times and get it broken down and onto the ground. The reason why we would choose to do it by hand and remove it, a lot of this work is proposed in the archery range, which is a really kind of sensitive area where they don't want a lot of equipment running around and running over their trails and kind of changing the character of that landscape. And then also along roadways, there's a possibility to actually bring that material to the road, chip it into a truck, and haul it off site. And so in that case, we would actually be removing fuels from the project site if there's a road nearby. Other treatments we're proposing are doing some hand cutting and pile burning. That's mostly on the land trust parcel, and they've already been doing a ton of work out there in partnership with CAL FIRE and the California National Guard. So anything we did on land trust land would just be kind of following up and doing a little bit more than what CAL FIRE's already done out there. And then there is a corner of the parcel where, as far as I know, CAL FIRE hasn't done much work, and we would actually be creating piles and burning them as part of this project. That's the pink area with the brown dots. And then also, in some areas, all we can do is lop and scatter, which is 4 inches and less and under, coming in and cutting that material up and kind of spreading it through the forest. And that's because it's too far away from the road to pull it out to the road to chip, and it's too steep or inaccessible for a piece of equipment to get back in there. And in that case, lop and scatter is really the only treatment we have available to us. And that includes right directly around the NID canals through BLM. Our NEPA doesn't allow us to get within 100 feet with equipment of those canals. And then the last treatment's pink. Here is hand cut and pile. We're going to do a little bit of hand cut and pile in some areas where it's that's really the best treatment, at least as far as my conversations with BLM so far. So I just want to give you guys that brief overview of what the color coding means. It's about 200 acres of treatment that we're proposing. And really, if you think about it, I have some before and after pictures from our Minimum Forest project to give you guys a visual. We would take something like this, which is what you guys see mostly when you walk out there. It's a conifer forest that has a lot of stuff coming up in the understory. a lot of what we call shade-tolerant conifers like cedar, Doug fir, white fir. They're coming in and they're growing in very densely. And this is with a track chipper. So this is where a chipper actually went overland on tracks, and a hand crew came through and create windrows of material that were then fed into the track chipper, and those chips were just blown back out. So this is the same area before and after. You can see this tree. One tree is here in both pictures. So big trees are still left. It's really just clearing out a lot of that little stuff from the understory. And the idea is if a fire came through here, it would just kind of blow through, burn up some of the surface fuel. Maybe a couple of individual trees might torch and die, but you wouldn't get that huge going up into the canopy and crown fire running through the whole area that we don't want to see. This is what mastication would look like on one of our projects. This is probably a little more intense than what we would do. The operator here was actually getting the masticator a little bit down into the soil and doing a little bit of like rototilling, which is not good for the equipment and also not great for the soil. You can see same sort of deal. We're not going to work with that operator again. So just zooming in, I just wanted to spend the rest of the time just zooming in on particular areas that you guys might have questions about. This is the Gracie Road coming up, and you can see that I've proposed to do what I'm calling hand cut and remove. This is 200 feet on either side of the road. So it would create a 400-foot wide shaded fuel break along Gracie Road. And like I said, all that material ideally we're going to ask the contractor to take it away. So chip it into the back of a truck and take it somewhere. And then, as I said, there's these gaps of no treatment on the map, and I should just explain why there are some areas where we're not proposing any treatment. Some areas there's been a lot of treatment already. Like, for instance, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been back around this reservoir, but the city of Nevada City in the last few years has done a bunch of work masticating and chipping around the reservoir. So there's no need for us to do that there. Other areas, like in the archery range, we've been asked by the Sportsmen's Club to leave vegetation on either side of each one of their archery target lanes. And there's a few reasons for that. One is safety. It's a lot safer of a range if you can't see any of the other targets. Because there's less distractions. Like if you're shooting an arrow and you see somebody else walking on a trail or shooting at another target, you're more apt to be distracted and kind of have an arrow go awry. At least that's what they tell me. So safety is one consideration. Another consideration is just their aesthetics. They really want to maintain this kind of forested feel. They don't want to have it all opened up because that's what attracts a lot of people to this area. So we've really been trying to work closely with them to have a treatment that works with what their operations are in that area. But what it's meant is that there are going to be some areas around their targets that we're not going to be able to get in and treat. Like I said, right along the canals themselves and in some of these temporary stream channels, we're not allowed to go in with equipment, so we're only going to be able to get in there and drag stuff out along the edges or do that less intensive lop and scatter treatment. I don't know what else really to say about this map right now. I did say that the rest of the area would be treated with a masticator. These are all areas where, the slope. That's another reason why we might have excluded an area. It's just too inaccessible. Like slopes that are more than 60% slope, we're not going to put a hand crew in that area. It's not really safe or worth it. So some of the areas were excluded just because there's a lot of really steep topography. Here's a zoom in on the uphill side of Gracie. This is the parking lot for the Cascade Canal access trail that goes here and kind of meets up with the Cascade Canal right here. Same thing, we're proposing to remove, fuels 200 feet on either side of Gracie Road, and then otherwise come in with like a small masticator. And in our experience, when we work with a masticator operator that's really skilled, it's even less of an impact than a hand crew with a chipper on tracks. And if any of you guys are interested in talking more about that, you can come up afterwards and talk to me. We've had a lot of experience on our Intimate Forest project about different types of equipment and different types of treatment and what ends up having the best result. And there's a handful of masticator operators in the county that are just really good at what they do and have a really good eye for aesthetics, but also for the ecology and leaving certain, habitat places and not having just a uniform treatment throughout. We're not trying to do a understory clear cut. We really want to have little pockets that are still untreated even within this larger matrix. And I'm saying that because when I say mastication, you might have an idea in your mind of other mastication projects that you've seen, and some that I've seen are pretty much a mess. It really depends on the type of equipment that you have and the skill of the operator, the experience of the operator. It's like night and day, apples and oranges on different types of mastication projects, in my experience. Yes, Andrew. Yeah, that's a good question. So for the BLM portion of the project, we have a NEPA document. That's the environmental compliance that we had to do. And it has very specific requirements that we have to follow, including that there's a whole list of trees that we're not allowed to cut. Anything that, basically what we're going to be targeting are mostly conifers, except for, I don't know if there's any Pacific yew in the area, but we're not going to be going after those. We're not allowed to. And we might also take out some small oaks and madrones, hardwoods, in certain instances. But yeah, anything like a dogwood or a big leaf maple, what we call kind of the riparian trees, even if they're not growing next to a stream, we're still not allowed to cut them. And so flagging is actually really important. On our other projects, we have had a team of people, volunteers, or just staff members who've gone through every inch of the project area looking for those particular plants and flagging them for retention. It's a pretty important part of the project. Yes, sir. Are
you going to want volunteers from this area to help?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if you're interested. It's fun. Are you volunteering, Andrew? Okay. So then I'm just going to talk a little bit about the private lands. So like I said, the Woodpecker Preserve, there's already this whole tan area, well not the whole tan area, but most of this tan area has already had at least one round of treatment, if not more, over the last few years. But there are still some areas, especially along the edges, where I think there's still work to be done. And so we're going to work with Kate and the Land Trust to identify what they want to see happen there, and whatever CAL FIRE hasn't done, we can come in with funding and a crew to help them out there. And then there's this other portion of the parcel that is not accessible from the top. It's more accessible through the Howard's property here. And we can get in and treat that. Hasn't been treated yet. And then, yeah, this is called the Little Deer Preserve, and it's owned by the Howards. Barry's here. And, yeah, we're proposing to do a lot of the same work here that we've seen in other areas. Some hand piling and burning, some dragging out to where the masticator can get at it. And these are still draft plans. I'm going to go out with Barry or some folks this month to take a look at all the downed trees that are in that area, and might bring a contractor out to help us think through the logistics of it. Could be that a masticator is not exactly the right piece of equipment for that area. So there's still some work to be done. The reason why I say in the next month is because here's a picture of a track chipper, in case nobody's seen it. It's a chipper on tracks, and it can go off into the woods and be fed by a hand crew or by a small excavator or something. And there's some pictures of pile burning, people pulling Scotch broom. It's just the types of things that we might see out in this area for the next few years. So timing, the reason why I said that over the next month is we are targeting some funding from Sierra Nevada Conservancy. They've been really good at funding our Intima Forest project. We've raised over $3 million so far from SNC and CAL FIRE for that project. And SNC really funded the planning for this project, and they really like to follow their planning funding with implementation funding. So we feel like we have a pretty good chance of getting this project funded. But grants are due at the end of this month. We wouldn't know whether we got the award until March of next year at the earliest. And then at the earliest, our grant agreement wouldn't be signed until May of next year. So the earliest that if we do get funding from Sierra Nevada Conservancy, which is a big if, the earliest that work could happen out here is November of next year. And of course that depends on what's happening in November. If it's really dry, high fire danger, we wouldn't be starting until later, like mid-December or so. And we have a limited operating period for this project. It's basically November through February. And the reason is we have California spotted owl all through the project area. We have at least 3 known nesting pairs in this area, and we're not allowed to do any mechanical work during their breeding season, which starts March 1st and goes all the way through the end of August. So yeah, it would be a tight time frame. 200 acres. It's a little much to do in 1 year during that tight time frame, so we would probably be spreading it out over a couple of years. Yes, I think I'm at the end of my presentation, so if any of you guys have questions that you want to pose for the group, yeah, go ahead.
If the Conservancy funding doesn't come through, is there any sort of other avenue that you might investigate?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the Conservancy is just the easiest, most obvious funder to me, but there are other funding sources out there. We have received funding from CAL FIRE for our Intima Forest project before. Those grants are getting really competitive, so I don't know, we would have to work with CAL FIRE directly to make sure that it gets prioritized within our unit, and we have to make sure that there's enough funding coming to the unit for everything that they want to see happen that year. But yeah, CAL FIRE is definitely a possibility. And then there's also a lot of other funding sources. We've been working with Nevada County OES on some other projects, and they've been successful or hope to be successful getting federal funding through FEMA for some of their projects. So yeah, I'm kind of starting with SNC because it's the easiest for me, but then if that doesn't work, there are other possibilities. But that would push the timeline out. If we didn't get funding from SNC, it might not happen next year. Yeah.
What about private lands that abut the BLM land that need work?
Repeat the question.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'll repeat the question. So private lands that abut BLM land that also need work. So as a nonprofit, as a project manager, it's infinitely harder to cobble together a project with 20, 30 different landowners than it is. Right now I'm working with 3 landowners. So it's not to say that it's not possible, but the easiest thing that we can do as an organization, I think, is just to help people I understand that there are other pots of funding that are out there for private landowners and to assist people with getting those grants for themselves. That said, it is possible that we could, think about putting together a project with multiple landowners. We're trying to do it in other parts of the county, so definitely possible. And if the Friends of Banner Mountain organization might be a good venue for trying to organize something like that. So if that is something that a bunch of you want to see happen, then it could be I can talk to Jeff and Ann about how can we facilitate that conversation. How can we start talking as a community about how to put things together into a package that we can sell to funders. So yeah, it's a possibility for sure. Yes.
I was just wondering, do you have information about what happens to the animals and their habitat? Because, when we clear it all out, I keep thinking, is there really places for the animals to hide and, live, etc.? Because, so much of our land is the undergrowth and all that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. The question is, what happens to all the animals and their habitat after doing a project like this? The good thing about working with BLM is that, at least in this county and in a lot of parts of California, it's small parcels, relatively small, that are surrounded by other private land or other landowners. And so, unlike the Forest Service that might have 400, 600 acre project that's all contiguous, we're kind of constrained to work on these small parcels. And what that means is that we have this treatment, but then right next to it is somebody else's private land, and we haven't gone in and done anything there. So in some ways that's not ideal, because you don't have a big continuous, fuel break if a wildfire comes through. But if you're looking at it with a wildlife lens, it's great, because it means that there's all this untreated habitat that's right next to the project area. And that's what it will look like when we're done. There'll be treatments on BLM and on land trust and other private land, but then right around it there's not much that's happened yet. And also within this particular project, there's all those areas that I mentioned that are going to be left untreated. And we are required by the NEPA that we're working with to leave certain untreated reserves for wildlife within all the treatment areas. And we're kind of achieving that automatically here, just because of those kind of... I forgot to mention, there are some areas in the middle of the parcels, like this little triangle right here and this strip right here, that are going to be untreated. And that's just because the NEPA analysis that we're working with only allows us to treat within 200 feet of the property line, or within 200 feet of a trail or a road, or any other sort of infrastructure. And so these areas just happen to be more than 200 feet away from any of that stuff. And so they're not going to be treated. So there are going to be pockets of areas where, like if you're concerned about birds that like to nest in dense shrubs, there will be some pockets of dense shrubs that are going to be left. And hiding places for other critters too. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yes.
May I ask a question about some specific animals?
Sure. I don't know if I can answer them.
We have a lot of foxes in this
okay.
area. I think all of us work on it to make sure they're safe, they don't get poisoned. I have a bear that lives in my backyard. We've got some skunks around. Raccoons, of course. So these larger mammals, what impact might this have on those larger animals, and of course the food that they forage for?
That's a great question. So the question is, what impact might this type of project have on the larger animals like bears or foxes, and also the food that they're foraging for? I am not a wildlife expert, so I can only tell you Anecdotally, what I've seen on our project up in the Inman Forest and what I've heard from the neighbors up there, we did put out camera traps in some of our project areas. And so if you're talking about ringtail cats, for instance, well, they're not really cats, but ringtails, for instance, they were seen in one part of the project before the project started, and then we have caught them on the camera traps after the project. Mostly, I think they're moving through the project area. Their particular den site was probably not. The chances that their den site is actually in the project area are kind of slim, just because they utilize such a large area. And I think the same is probably true for the foxes and the bears. They're kind of moving through these areas, and they're not necessarily dependent on any one particular area for everything they need. And in some cases, opening up the forest actually is beneficial to them, because now they can get through areas that they couldn't get through before. But like robust studies about the impact of fuels treatment on wildlife, I haven't done a lot of research or read a lot of papers about it. It'd be interesting to see what the actual wildlife biologists have to say about it. Yeah. I will say that we are concerned about listed species, so that's why I talked about the California spotted owl. There's been good research that shows that the owls won't abandon a nest even if there's loud noises like a chainsaw or heavy equipment working nearby. But that said, we still don't want to work within their breeding season, just because we don't want to have any chance that they might abandon their nest. But they're pretty resilient critters. And actually, opening up the understory can help them with their foraging, because they can see their prey, like mice or wood rats, a little bit better. Yeah, it's complicated. It's a good question. Yeah. I think you had your hand up first back there.
In my experience over the last 40 years we've lived up here, I've had 53 trees, cedar trees, stay down around my property, around the home, because of fire abatement, and I have seen more wildlife. And I'm fine with it. I talk to the bears. Of course, I was stoned. But anyway, but I've seen more birds of prey. I've seen more fox. I've seen bobcats. You know, so I don't see a problem with opening up the farm at all. And it makes the bigger trees healthier, like you said.
Yeah, I think if anything, you might see a shift in the types of animals that are... I mean, certain animals like to have an open understory, and some don't. So you might see less of the birds that need a lot of cover to hide, and more birds that like to have it open for foraging and finding food. Yeah. But these treatments are temporary. You know, they kind of have a lifetime. Our intention is to come and maintain these treatments, and certainly it's easier to maintain them once they've been treated initially. You know, you can come in with a masticator, 5 or 10 years from now and make quick work of a 200-acre project if it was already been treated within the last 5 or 10 years. So, but things regrow. So, there may be pockets of shrubs that grow back, within 5 or 10 years, and then the birds start to use them again before we come in and masticate again. But, one thing to keep in mind is that the whole thing we're trying to do is take the forests back to the way that they were before fire suppression started, 150 years ago. All the forests in the Sierra Nevada, this elevation used to be a lot more open. And, you hear stories of the old-timers who could, I've heard this enough times that I believe it. You could ride a horse all the way from downtown Nevada City up to Bowman Lake and go anywhere you wanted to go. You didn't need to be on a trail because the forest was so open. And I think it's hard for us to imagine because most of us have lived here less than that amount of time, and we've gotten used to this dense forest. But really, like, if you go back 150 years,
If you go back 150 years, it was no forest.
well, yeah. Sorry, you have to go back before the gold rush. And all the trees were cut down. 170 years, 173 years, I don't know. Yes, back there. Sure.
The hand-cut and pile, what size of piles are left? Is that safe for fire?
Yeah, so the question is, if there are piles that are left and are not burned, I presume that's what you're asking. You're concerned about the piles not getting burned. Is that safe for fire? I don't know. Jason, do you want to talk about that? I'm not a fire guy, so...
And I'm not a fuels guy. We do have issues coming back and burning piles right now. It's, as you know, living here, it's making sure you have the window, the burn window to come back and get them. But usually we try not to leave many piles behind. I mean, that's the intent. Leave them where we have to and then come back and burn them where we can.
How big will these piles be?
Yeah, so we're limited to 6 by 6 by 6. It's kind of the standard. Although I think in practice you don't usually see them 6 feet tall. I think 4 by 4 by 4 is kind of more. It's within that range. And they would be away from. So the piles ideally would be away from the drip line of the remaining trees. Because when you come back and burn them, you don't want to have a bunch of branches overhanging that you might catch the tree on fire. So I think even if they weren't burned, it's probably still better than if they weren't cut at all, because you have that all that fuel that was distributed and actually was creating ladders of fuel that going up in the canopy. It's now been concentrated and moved away from the residual trees, and you would probably have like a pocket of really intense burning in one area rather than a potential, spread and increase in fire behavior that would go up potentially into the canopy. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So, and then we have a lot of piles on the minimum forest that were created that have never been burned, and they do get smaller as the years go by. And then the pine needles fall on top of them, and after 5 years they've kind of gone. So I'm not saying that's ideal. I'm not saying that's what we're going for, but I'm saying it's not horrible, and it's probably better than not doing anything. Yeah, and we've tried to minimize the hand piling on BLM because BLM has very limited resources for coming back and burning them. We're really only proposing to do that treatment in areas where we can't get a piece of equipment, but we don't want to just do that lop and scatter treatment because it's not going to really do what we want it to do. Yes. Yeah, the operating period, if we want to be using pieces of equipment like a masticator or a chipper, would be limited to November through February. And November, I'm saying we have started as early as November before, but if it's a high fire danger time, like in November, like it is some years, then we wouldn't be able to start until later, closer to Christmas or. Yeah, no, it's not the concern is, as she's mentioning, that there's other things that are happening during that time, whether it's snow or even heavy rain, that would prevent us from working. Especially when you have a masticator or a track chipper, if it's too wet, we're not allowed to use it because you're creating soil ruts and causing erosion, soil compaction, things like that. So yeah, it's a little bit of a dance. Usually we're shooting for those weather windows where the contractors can come in and just bust it out. A lot of years we have the January, warm and dry Januaries. I know it hasn't happened maybe the last couple of years, but it's happened a bunch for me over the last 5 years, enough for us to get a lot of work done in January. But the good thing about working with Sierra Nevada Conservancy as a funder is that they have the latitude to have very long grant agreements, up to 5 years in some cases. And so that means that if we can't get it all done 1 year, then hopefully we can come back the next year and do it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Another question, sorry. It takes several seasons
Yeah. Yeah, so he's making a comment that there could be some prioritization that happens if we can't do it all at once. And I think there's a question in there too about what maybe the priorities would be. And I think you're right on that. I also think that Gracie Road evacuation route would be the first thing that I would want to do. Yeah. Yes?
You know about Gracie Road, will that be then clearing all the wood that's there now and flying on the side?
So, okay, I'll talk a little bit more about the prescription, which is actually what we would be telling the contractors to do. So, the question was, apparently there's a lot of wood that's already down along Gracie Road, and the question was, are we going to be treating that as well? We've worked up a draft prescription which would go into the contract, and basically, if something's down on the ground, it's still going to be treated as long as it's underneath 10 inches. So that includes branches. So if it's a larger tree that's fallen down, we would have the contractors remove all the branches and put that through the chipper or masticate it. Anything larger than 10 inches would be cut up, bucked up, to like 3 or 4 feet long, and spread out a little bit to try to get it down on the ground and start decomposing. That's the best we can do with the larger material. Yeah. I don't know exactly what the condition you are referencing, but I should go get out and look at it.
I'll explain it really quick.
Okay.
So during the storm we had last winter,
Yeah.
parts of Gracie had 5 to 7 feet of snow in it. And so you have dead and down laying in the ditches, including root balls, fully uprooted trees. And that stuff that really needs to be taken care of by the county prior to the rainy season, otherwise the ditches are going to fail. So that's pretty much the whole extent of the upper part of Gracie Road.
Yeah, so I assume you're talking about stuff that's within the county's right away.
It's on the roadside, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't talked to Nevada County about this, but I can see someone taking notes back there. Yeah, that's ideally the county would be taking care of stuff that's within their right of way. We can treat it. We can treat it, up to 10 inches, and then we can buck up the rest. But if it's stuff larger than 10 inches that's in the ditch, then I would expect that it would be the county that would be removing it from the ditch and not us. Yes.
Is it a different permit to take larger trees? Because I'm thinking in some areas the density of the forest is so high that that's not healthy either. So thinning would help.
Yep, great question. The question was, what about the larger trees, and wouldn't some thinning help? I was considering doing some timber harvest. So when you start to get into 10 inches, 12 inches and over, then the only real way to dispose of that material is through some kind of logging operation. It would either be taking the saw logs to a sawmill, or it would be taking, chipping whole trees and taking the chips to a biomass plant or something like that. That's a whole other level of activity. It's no longer a fuels reduction project. It's now a timber project, because you have to have, a timber contract, to have the contractor purchase that material to take it to the sawmill or to take it to the biomass plant. So not only is it a next level up in terms of like contracting with the BLM, but it's also a much larger impact on the ground. And so when you have logging equipment in there, you have to create landings. You have to create a place to bring all that material in order to process it, to load it onto trucks. Those landings can be 1 to 2 acres in size that would need to be cleared. And then from that landing, there would be temporary roads, skid roads, that would go out into the forest to haul that material to the landing. The 2 areas that had access, so most of the area that is on the map, it's not even possible to do that, because there was no access to get in there with logging equipment, logging trucks. There were 2 areas that I did identify that were a possibility. I'll show you where they are. One was, in the archery range, because you can come in right off the Banner Mountain Trail, create a landing in there. But the Sportsmen's Club folks, they had a hard no for that. They didn't want to see logging trucks in the archery range. Logging equipment like skid rows and things like that. The other area that could potentially work is just downhill from the Land Trust's Cascade Canal Access Trail parking lot, right there. But I got feedback from some of the residents in there that they weren't interested in seeing a big logging operation as well. So there's a balance here between getting the fuels treated and reducing the risk, but also not having such a huge impact that you're losing the aesthetic value, the wildlife habitat value, soil compaction issues. So there's a big trade-off on a lot of these projects. And this one, I don't think it lends itself very well to a timber harvest at this point, based on those issues and the feedback from the community. There are other areas, like in our Intimum Forest project, we're going to do 80, 100 acres of biomass harvest this next year, but it's all in former plantations where there's easy, flat areas to create landings, and it's a pretty heavily impacted area to begin with. Just lends itself really well to a biomass harvest. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, where's that harvest going to wind up? What biomass facility?
So the question is, where do, chips, if you want to sell them to a biomass plant, where do you take them? There's only one option right now. The Loyalton plant up in Plumas County, I don't think is working right now, so the only place we can take them is Lincoln. It's the Rio Bravo Rockland plant, which is actually in Lincoln. It's like an hour away, 45 minutes away from here, maybe. It's expensive. So, but we can build subsidize the transportation cost into our grant, if that's what we're doing for the Intimum Forest project. Yes, Alex.
So I thought I would just speak really quickly to the roadside presentation on Gracie Road. And Alex, I'm hearing home to OES, and I just wanted to let you guys know that it is absolutely on our radar. We have budgeting from CAL FIRE for cleanup at 2023 winter storm, and one of the things we did was put out a call to projects to communities that we knew were especially impacted. And so right now, I just checked my email to make sure that Gracie Road was on the project list. But we solicited from the firewise communities in those impacted areas basically a priority project form to take in that information so that we could design small little capsule projects that would address those needs. So we're going through and creating budgets for those right now so that we can match them with contractors. So there will be resources to address some of those issues. I can't guarantee the extent because we have a lot of communities that were impacted, but I just want you to know that you've been heard, we are aware, and we're doing our best to deploy the resources we can to meet your needs.
Thanks, Alex. Any other questions? I'm going to be available after this. I'm going to be right up here, and I'm going to have a map with me. So anybody wants to come up and continue the conversation. And then, like I said, Jason and Kate and Aaron are also going to be kind of distributed around the room. And if you have specific questions for BLM or Barry Yuba Land Trust or Sierra Streams Institute, you can talk to one of them. I will say that Jason or Kate or Aaron, they're not super familiar with this map or the proposed treatments. This might be even the first time that some of them are seeing them. So maybe they're not the best to talk to about the specific treatments that we're proposing. But if you have general questions for the BLM, you can talk to Jason, or if you have questions about the work that the Land Trust has been doing on the Woodpecker Preserve, you can talk to Kate. If you have questions about the science that's gone into this project and just forest health in general, Aaron Andrews from SSI is a really good resource. So, yeah, is there any other questions that people want to? Yeah, go ahead.
The NID canals, the DS and
Yeah.
Cascade, is there any way to clear the fuels that NID has left along the ditches and they're not going to clear them?
The question is NID has apparently left a bunch of material right along the ditches and maybe doesn't have plans to treat them. Is there any way that can be part of this project? We are planning to treat all the way up to the edge of the canal. But like I said, on the BLM section, our environmental compliance documents don't allow any mechanical work right next to the canal. So we would do that lop and scatter treatment, which is a lower intensive 4 inches and under, and just kind of cutting, bucking up that material and spreading it. On the private land, we are not constrained that same way, so we're able to get all the way up to the canal with some of our treatments there. So yeah, we are including the NID canals as part of the project, right up to the edge of the canals as part of our project. Thank you. Yeah, another question?
Well, just real quick, I remember seeing Chrs and Chrs on the NID pathway, so they did have equipment on there.
Yeah, apparently this woman is saying that there was some maybe NID working there along the canal. I have to say I've actually been out of the county for the last year, so I don't know what's all the work that's been happening here. It could be that NID is staged material for they're planning to come back and do it later, or I'm not sure. But anything that they don't do, we can do with our contractors. It will be included in our contract. Yes.
I've only been here 3 years, and we're right above the Cascade Canal. What we've noticed is NID does come in approximately annually because they need to clear the canal, anything that's fallen in it. In the heavy snowstorms the last 2 years, they've been in here very promptly because the big trees have been down across the canal and across the pathway, and they've removed that stuff pretty promptly. But basically, they just dump it down hills. And some of these trees are, well, it's not quite in the workshop, but there's a 3-foot diameter tree that went over. So there's some massive trees that are down out there, probably far behind the ability of your equipment you described to deal with in those areas. So you would think that NID might be able to cooperate or help in some way. I don't know. Yeah,
I'm not sure. What I know is that they really just work right in their easement. And if material has been moved onto BLM or onto private land outside of their easement, then what we could do is, if it's a larger tree, we would come in and we would limit, so we'd take off all the limbs, chip them or masticate them or scatter them, depending on the area, and then the existing trunk of the tree or the bole of the tree we would cut up into smaller chunks, like 3 to 4 inch pieces, and get those down on the ground and spread out so they can start to decompose. It's really the only tool that we have available to us for treating that larger stuff.
Bring a big chainsaw.
Yeah, right? Yeah, 3-foot tree. Yes.
So, Chris, when you were talking about that, and there's a lot of residences between the BLM parcels, like this gap. One of my neighbors specifically asked about, that area, because he's also, NID is throwing logs down the hill. And so, anyway, there's a lot of residences here, too. Like, would that be included in the scope of what you're talking about?
We would be limited because of our environmental documentation and the surveys and the reports that we've written so far. We're limited on this project to working within the boundary of what you have drawn there. If there's something that's like right on the boundary, potentially the contractors could bring it in and treat it within the project area. But I don't expect that they would be going much beyond those big boundary lines at this phase of the project. Yeah, let's thank you so much for coming out.